what I'm going to discuss is the topic of poly breakups, and understanding poly breakups, causes, prevention, and survival is the topic. And I'm hoping someone will give me a 5-minute warning when my time is almost up. I don't know where Dave went. We're on our own here. Dave has abandoned the ship. Okay, well, I want to ask, how many people here have been through at least one very painful poly breakup? Oh, okay. How about 2? How about 5 or 6? Okay. You guys got a good track record, 1 or 2. That's great. Good. As you know, as everyone here probably is aware, not all poly relationships live happily ever after. And in fact, most poly people do go through a very steep learning curve of having to go through a few different relationships and a few breakups that can be unbelievably painful and difficult to get through. And I want to talk about some of the causes particularly and what people go through with poly breakups. I wanted to add a disclaimer that as many of you know, I have no academic credentials whatsoever. Even though this is supposed to be an academic conference, I am only speaking to you because someone else canceled and Dave offered me the slot. So, so you're stuck with me, and I will do my best to say some things that are educational or at least mildly entertaining. Even though I'm not a researcher, not a scientist, I have a number of decades of experience with being a part of the polyamorous community and counseling many, many people through some very tough poly breakups. And I'm going to suggest that you take everything I say tonight with a grain of salt. I've been led to some very strong conclusions by my experience, but that should not be construed as scientific facts. Unlike our previous speaker, I did not do a scientific study. I'm going on all of the anecdotal evidence from my clients and other people that I've interviewed. I've done about 30 interviews now in addition to working with clients, and I'm in the process of writing a book on poly breakups, and I'm going to be hoping to do about 30 or 40 more interviews, and I will be recruiting you to sit for me for several hours and be interrogated relentlessly about all the details of your poly breakup. I can't claim my methods are totally scientific, but it does work for me to get information out of people. So I want to talk briefly about monogamous relationships and monogamous breakups, and that may seem like an odd choice, but the reason is that a lot of the poly breakups happen for the same reasons that monogamous relationships break up. And as well, a lot of poly people bring their sort of monogamously oriented belief system into a poly relationship, and that adds to the pain and suffering when a breakup occurs. What I mean by that is a key difference between monogamous relationships and polyamorous relationships is that with a monogamous relationship, there is the assumption embedded in the relationship that you are looking for the one true love and that you're going to mate with that person for life. The reality, of course, is, as you've seen in your families and your communities, that most monogamous people do not, in fact, mate for life. Most monogamous people tend to practice one of 2 relationship styles that are neck and neck to be the most popular relationship style of the early 21st century. That is serial monogamy and professed monogamy with cheating. And both of those styles probably shouldn't actually be called monogamous, but they are. So we're going to just go with those terms. We probably should invent a new term for it. For instance, people who practice serial monogamy, while they may technically be sexually and romantically exclusive with each person that they get in a relationship with for the duration of that relationship, Many people who practice serial monogamy may have 50 or 100 or more sexual and relationship partners throughout their lifetime. So it somehow doesn't seem exactly accurate to call them monogamous. But the people that practice monogamy and cheating, that is also a huge percentage of monogamously oriented people. There's been many, many studies done of married and cohabiting couples and their levels of cheating, and it's clear from all of these studies that in at least half of all marriages and cohabiting couple relationships, one or both partners are cheating at some point during that relationship. So those people can't really be called monogamous either. And the reason I'm focusing on this a little bit is because those monogamously oriented people do have the belief that a relationship should last forever, and if it doesn't, that it's a failure or a mistake. And I believe that a lot of poly people bring that same belief into poly relationships, and then when a poly relationship doesn't work out, they are devastated and vacillate between blaming themselves, blaming their partner, or oftentimes it leads to a real crisis in self-esteem or feeling that they're not worthy of love, and there seems to be some need to find a culprit or a villain. And that's a very monogamous kind of mindset. And for those of us who are poly, we really need to start looking at other ways of judging the success or failure of the relationship rather than longevity. Longevity is not the true measure of whether a relationship is, quote, successful or whether it's happy and healthy. And particularly as poly people, is it really realistic, this idea of several permanent and successful relationships that are going to last for a lifetime? Is that even desirable? I mean, do we really want every person we get involved with to stay with us for life? When someone signs on to a poly relationship, they're not promising to stay forever. They're not committing to a lifetime. So we really do have to look at other measures. For instance, what was the quality of your life while you were in that relationship, even if it has ended? Did that relationship, did you learn new skills in that relationship that make you a better relationship partner? Did you have a hell of fun in that relationship? Did you create something together, whether that means having children together, or whether that means taking care of your aging parents together, or building a house together, or being involved in doing political activism work together? Did you do something together in the relationship that really was valuable to you? These are all much more important measures of the relationship's success or failure than whether the relationship lasts 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, or a lifetime. So I really encourage poly people, particularly when they're going through a breakup, to really examine their attitudes about relationship and to avoid looking for someone to blame for the breakup or to seeing it as a failure rather than seeing it as this was a great relationship but it really wasn't destined to last forever. So I want to talk about poly breakups and why they happen. My experience is that at least 50%, at least half of all poly relationships break up for the same reasons that monogamous relationships break up. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, the answer is simple. We, poly people, are not any smarter than the monogamous people, and we make just as many stupid mistakes as they do about falling in love with or getting sexually and romantically involved with people that are utterly and completely incompatible with us for 100 different reasons. I know that we like to be smug and think that we are smarter or more highly evolved than the monogamous people. We like to think we're better at doing relationships than the monogamous people, but get over ourselves. We are not, unfortunately. We are just as likely as they are to have mush for brains when it comes to love, sex, and romance, and to make all the same mistakes. And so we're likely to have poly breakups for the same 7 reasons that non-monogamous people break up. It's what I call the usual suspects, or the big seven. And I'm sure, because a lot of you in this room are therapists, you're very aware of what those reasons are. The first four, sex, money, domestic issues, and conflicts around autonomy and intimacy, are relationship problems in that they are created in the relationship itself. The next three of those big seven, drug and alcohol addiction, untreated mental health conditions, and anger management issues leading to abuse, those three are not relationship problems, because those are problems that one person brings into the relationship, and only that person can solve that problem. They are not relationship problems, but they will destroy a relationship just as certainly as the first four. I'm going to talk about those seven problems just a little bit. The first, sex, of course, a big problem, a big reason lots of relationships break up. It can be in a monogamous relationship. Those problems tend to be around mismatched libidos, the infamous desire discrepancy that we hear so much about, or people who are mismatched in terms of their sexual needs. Anything from I want sex once a day and you want sex once a month, to I'm kinky, you're not, to I want sex to be a tantric, blissful heart connection, and you want it to be down and dirty and raunchy, and there can be any number of things that cause people to break up over sex. With monogamous people, cheating is often a reason that people break up. However, with polyamorous relationships, cheating also causes people to break up. And with a monogamous relationship, cheating is defined as having sex or romance with anyone outside the relationship. With polyamorous relationships, cheating is defined as breaking agreements around sex. And whether that involves lying or whether it just involves breaking a specific agreement, anything from don't have unprotected sex with anyone besides me, or don't sleep with my best friend or anyone within our social circle, or don't get any other women pregnant, or don't bring home any sexually transmitted infections, or don't get involved with anybody that's a co-worker. There are any number of kinds of agreements that people make around sex in polyamorous relationships, and breaking those agreements is a good way to get to cause a breakup in your relationship. However, I'm sure that many of you have noticed in your own lives and in your clients' lives that for polyamorous people, sex can actually be helpful to your relationship. And having sex with other people and having outside relationships can actually help your relationship. This is especially true for desire discrepancies, where one person wants sex a lot more often than the other. It certainly can take the pressure off of that situation if you're able to seek sex and romance outside of the relationship. However, this often ends up leading to the relationship breaking up if you are not sexually satisfied in your pre-existing relationship and you start having a fabulously satisfying sexual relationship with someone else. There's often the tendency to start transferring your love and loyalty to that other person with whom you're having a great sexual relationship. This is often a terrible mistake because you're comparing apples and oranges. Oftentimes someone will abandon a long-term pre-existing relationship because they are in the thrall of that infamous new relationship energy, where they're having great sex and romance with someone new, and that relationship that's pre-existing just can't really compete for sparkle and excitement with a new relationship with someone that you don't know well enough yet to know that you may be completely incompatible. You just haven't figured that out yet. So I've seen many people make the mistake of abandoning a pre-existing relationship because they're blinded by the hot sex and romance with someone new and different. I usually tell people that a kind of a good rule of thumb is that having sexual relationships outside your pre-existing relationship is likely to help your relationship and enhance your pre-existing relationship if in fact you are having some sex at home and some satisfying sex at home, because then your goal is to supplement a good relationship that is sexually satisfying, but you're just not getting enough sex or just not getting enough of a variety of sex. However, it's likely to jeopardize your pre-existing relationship if you are having no sex in your pre-existing relationship, or if you are having very unsatisfying sex in the pre-existing relationship. So it can be a double-edged sword and can be a cause of a lot of poly breakups if you're starting to have good sex outside of your relationship. I wanted to talk about the next of the so-called Big Seven, which is money issues. In a monogamous relationship, money issues usually have to do with one person is making more money than the other, and one person feels they're carrying too much of the load, or one person is from a different class background than the other, has very different beliefs and very different values around money, or one person is valuing work, career, and making money more than the other, whereas the other person is more focused on other things that are more important to them in their lives. With a monogamous relationship, certainly problems around money can be fatal to the relationship. It usually has a slightly different manifestation in a poly relationship. Usually in a poly relationship, there's a pre-existing issue around money. One person is unhappy with the other person as far as whether they're making enough money or whether they are working hard enough. And then the poly situation is kind of the final nail in the coffin, because that person who's making less money or is putting less emphasis on work and career, if they are now not only not making as much money and not working as much, but are instead spending their time out having sex with other people, the person who is more career-oriented is likely to become even more resentful, and that's going to put things over the edge and can cause a breakup. Or conversely, you already have a pre-existing issue where you have different values around money. Suddenly you're having a relationship with someone else and you're spending money on them, on taking them out for romantic candlelight dinners, taking them on weekend getaways, and your partner at home is saying, what am I, chopped liver? I'm at home, doing the dishes and watching the kids. You're out spending our hard-earned money on some other person. So that can also be a strong contributor. But usually it's because money and money issues are a pre-existing problem already, and then the poly situation is kind of puts it to the point where it becomes a crisis. Sometimes if you have other partners, they can be resentful about money issues as well, feeling like you are sharing your finances with your partner at home, and yet they do not have any opportunity to share finances with you or make financial decisions with you. So sometimes that is an issue that can cause a breakup. The third big issue that causes breakups for both poly people and monogamous people is what I call domestic issues. It's a combination of all the issues that arise out of two or more people living together. And a very obvious problem for poly people is if two people are living together, it's hard enough for them to get along in terms of keeping the house clean enough and schedules and doing all kinds of all the domestic things, whether it's raising children or whether you want children or don't want children, or any number of things that come up with living together. But if you add a third or fourth person to the household, which many poly people do or try to do, it becomes even more difficult for 3 or 4 or more people to have enough affinity on all of those domestic issues to live together harmoniously. So with poly relationships, the domestic issues that cause the breakups are usually the trying to add an additional person to the household, or if a group of people are trying to live together for the first time, if there's not like a primary couple that starts the relationship, if it's a group of people that are trying to live together, it really requires a very high level of affinity on everything from what you want to eat to who's going to do the housework to where you want to live and all those kinds of issues for a group of people to live together. And domestic issues are huge in dooming poly relationships. Some people will just tell you, well, don't try to add more people to your household. That's one way of avoiding the problem. Some people utilize an architectural solution, like living in a duplex where two people might live in one duplex, part of the duplex, and the others might live in the other. Or, some people try to solve the problem through that engineering approach, and that can really work if you have more than one person that you're madly in love with and want to live with, but you don't have that level of harmony on all of the domestic issues that there are. Or if one person has children and one of the other people doesn't want to live with children, or one person has elderly relatives living with them and another person doesn't want to live with them. There's all of those issues that they may seem small, but can absolutely destroy a relationship in a hurry. The fourth big relationship issue that is often fatal to both monogamous and poly relationships is differences and conflicts around autonomy and intimacy. Everyone has a kind of a perfect comfort zone between being part of a relationship and having enough privacy and autonomy to feel like you are a separate human being. And each person is going to draw that line in a different place, either wanting more togetherness and more intimacy, or wanting more autonomy and more time alone, more separation. In a monogamous relationship, these differences are almost always fatal to the relationship, because a monogamous couple will be locked in mortal combat where one person is continuously pleading and demanding more time and attention from their partner, more intimacy, more connection. They want the 24/7 joined at the hip relationship. The other person is desperately trying to carve out a little time to be alone. They're trying to desperately carve out a little freedom, a little autonomy, a little privacy. So in monogamous couples, this difference is almost always eventually going to be fatal, because the couple will become so polarized that they won't even be able to find any common ground. In a poly relationship, this can often be mitigated, because if you want more togetherness and intimacy and your partner is like, how can I miss you if you won't go away? You can mitigate that by, I want more attention. Well, I'll go and have another lover and get some of my needs for attention and intimacy met by that person. That often works really well. It takes the pressure off the other partner and you get more of what you want. When it doesn't work, and when it's often fatal to a poly relationship, is when the person who wants more autonomy and privacy and time alone decides, hey, I think I want to be poly too. I'm going to have a lover. And then the partner at home is getting even less than what they got before, which was barely enough for them to survive on. So the person who was already feeling a sense of scarcity now is experiencing something like starvation, because that partner who needs the autonomy and the time alone, they still need that even though they're having another partner, and so there's even less time and attention, and that often will cause the relationship to collapse. So it's kind of tricky, because sometimes these differences can be actually helped by polyamory, but oftentimes it will have the opposite effect, because if both partners are going to be out having other relationships, it makes the balance even more skewed, and then the couple will become even more polarized. I'm not going to say too much about the other three issues: drug addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, untreated mental health conditions, and anger issues that are leading to abuse or violence. Those are three issues that will doom a relationship, whether you're poly or whether you're monogamous. And these are issues that cannot really be solved within the context of the relationship. Only the person who brings that problem into the relationship can get the help they need and be able to solve that problem. Otherwise, the relationship is certainly going to be doomed. The only difference in poly relationships is that it will often take a lot longer to destroy the relationship with alcohol or drug addiction or an untreated mental health condition or an anger issue, because oftentimes you're not spending as much time together. The problem doesn't have the opportunity to really destroy the relationship for a longer period of time. It often becomes it becomes easier for someone to hide a problem like that. And I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that someone with a drug or alcohol problem or a mental health condition or even anger issues is not a good candidate for a relationship. They certainly can be if they are willing to do the work and get the treatment they need to resolve their problems. So I don't in any way want to stigmatize anyone who has any of those three issues. It's just if they are not willing to get any kind of help, then the relationship is not going to survive. So, as I said, my experience is at least half of all poly relationships end because of one of those 7 problems that are the same problems that doom monogamous relationships. What about the other half? The other half of poly relationships that end are usually ended because of 4 potential problems. The first one is falling in love with a committed monogamist. We've all done it. I've done it. I'm sure you have too. It happens for the best of reasons. You don't know that person is monogamous. They don't know that they need a monogamous relationship, or you both are so totally besotted with love, lust, or some kind of infatuation, that you delusionally believe that each of you believes you can convert the other to your point of view. My experience is that, again, I'm not a scientist, I can't prove this, but I am absolutely convinced that there are some people that are innately monogamous, and they will never be happy in any kind of relationship that is not sexually and romantically exclusive. That for whatever reason, they need sexual and romantic exclusivity in order to feel safe, loved, and respected. And they will feel mistreated and feel very unloved and feel very insecure and unsafe if they try to make a poly relationship of any kind work for them. It's unfortunate that not all people who are monogamous know that they are. It's also unfortunate that a lot of people who are poly don't know that they are. I'm just as convinced that there are some people that are innately polyamorous and need more than one relationship partner in order to feel happy and fulfilled. The tricky part is that there's a ton of people in between that are in the middle, and I call them the bisexuals of the poly-monogamous spectrum. And as a card-carrying bisexual myself since 1969, I totally relate to that concept of being in between the two extremes. My experience is, and my belief is, that most people actually are not innately monogamous nor innately polyamorous. That's a tongue twister. That most people, the majority, are in between. And what I mean by that is they can be happy in a monogamous relationship with the right person, under the right circumstances, at the right developmental stage of their lives. And they can be happy in a polyamorous relationship with the right people, the right situation, and again, at the right time of their lives when that type of relationship works for them. And most people, unfortunately, are just not sure where they are on this spectrum, and most people have not really thought about it much until they stumble into a polyamorous relationship and then discover that they have to figure out, am I innately monogamous? Am I polyamorous by nature? Or is there some way that I can make this situation right now work for me with the right kind of agreements or the right kind of person or people in this situation? So, unfortunately, most of us, by the time we realize whether we're poly or monogamous or somewhere in between, we're already hopelessly enmeshed in a relationship with someone who apparently is of the opposite, polar opposite of us in terms of being poly or monogamous. So the only prevention strategy is really to actually know what your needs are in relationship, to really do your own personal growth work so you know what you need, whether that's monogamy, polyamory, or whether you feel you can go either way with the right circumstances, and to gently but carefully question your potential relationship partners about what their relationship needs are, and try to avoid getting too seriously involved with someone if they're not certain, because you're doomed to suffer and to drag them and everyone around you through a terrible mess if you get seriously involved with someone who is monogamous and you're poly. You're not going to convert them, and they're very unlikely to convert you. Which you probably know that already. You probably already know they're not going to convert you, but you may believe that you can convert them. I have never seen it done. I've certainly seen it tried. So falling in love with a monogamist is the first and foremost cause of poly-related poly breakups that are caused directly by a cause that's related to the non-monogamous nature of the relationship. The second most common cause is getting involved with people who are poly, but they want a very different model of polyamory than you do. As our previous speaker described, the most commonly practiced model of polyamory is some form of the primary-secondary model, where one primary couple is the priority and any other relationship has to be less important in terms of time, attention, and level of commitment. I'm not promoting that model particularly. It's not my model, doesn't work for me at all, but it is by far the most commonly practiced, way far and above any of the other models, and it does seem to be very successful for a lot of people. However, the common mismatch that I see is someone who's in a primary-secondary model falls in love with someone outside of that primary couple, wants them to become a primary partner and to be just as primary and important as the initial partner. And of course, the initial partner is having none of it and is not okay with that. And they're saying, this is not what I signed up for. This actually can work if that person who is the initial partner is willing to be a co-primary, if they do not need to be the alpha. My experience is many people in a primary-secondary model, they do not only need to be primary, they need to be the alpha person in the pack. And so there is no way that they can tolerate or accept a second person being just as primary as they are. In some situations, a primary partner is happy to be primary and they don't need to be alpha. They're okay with someone being equal to them they're just not okay with being demoted to being secondary themselves. But the majority of the time, that person needs to be alpha, not only to be primary. That's what? What does alpha mean? Alpha means I have to be the most important person in your life. No one else is allowed to have equal status to me. And that seems to be the case with most people who choose a primary-secondary model. The other mismatch of models that I see the most is one person or 2 or 3 or 4 people want polyfidelity. They want to be in a group marriage and live together as a family, be sexually and romantically exclusive within that group. However, one person in the group wants relationship anarchy and does not want to be sexually romantically exclusive with the group and does not want to have to treat each relationship as equal, but wants to allow each relationship to rise to its own level. So that is those 2 models are mutually exclusive, and that relationship is doomed, at least for that person who doesn't want to be to agree to that model. So again, the prevention strategy is to know your relationship needs, know what model of polyamory you want. The fact that polyamory and open relationships are almost infinitely variant, I mean, there's almost an infinite number of models that exist, and that's a great beauty of it. It's a great strength of polyamory, but it's not a strength at all if you don't know what you want and you jump into a relationship with a person or people that are in a different model than you. It's just, you're just as incompatible as if you were falling in love with a monogamous. So getting to know your own needs and knowing what your partners want and need will help you hopefully avoid making this same mistake. The third reason that is poly-related, that poly couples break up, is that is inadequate time and energy management skills. This is the cause of doom for many, many poly relationships. Not being able to manage your time and energy in a way that allows you to deliver on whatever it is you promise your partners. What, 5 more minutes? Okay. This is what I call the poly kid in a candy store syndrome, that, you know, you meet these wonderful people and you just are totally infatuated with them. You get involved with more people than you really can manage to really give them the attention, the time, the love, the consideration, the priority that they need and want. Or everything's going fine and you're managing everything pretty well, and then something goes wrong in your life or the life of one of your partners. You have a sick relative that you have to take care of, or God forbid you have a baby and suddenly you don't have time for anybody, or you know, you're not young anymore. You know, we all probably could manage those 3 or 4 great love affairs when we were 23, but a lot of us are no longer in that age group. We no longer have that level of energy or even time available. It might have worked when you didn't have children or high stress careers, etc., but now you're really not able to manage that kind of relationship situation. So the only prevention strategy is to really learn what your limits are and learn exquisite time and energy management skills. Abandon the myth of spontaneity in a poly lifestyle. A lot of people have this belief that they can just spontaneously get up in the morning and say, I think I'd like a date with partner A tonight. It really doesn't work that way. As much as we would love to have spontaneity, it is one of the things that we are likely will have to sacrifice in order to pursue a polyamorous lifestyle. The fourth and final cause of poly breakups that is directly poly related is jealousy. You may be surprised that jealousy is a distant fourth in the list of poly-related reasons that people break up. It's not that jealousy is not present in the first three scenarios. It is. If you fall in love with a monogamist, yes, they're going to be insanely jealous because sexual and romantic exclusivity is as necessary to their well-being as food and water. So you can bet they're going to be insanely jealous. But it's a symptom, not a cause. It's not the cause of the breakup. It's a symptom of the dysfunction in the relationship because you have picked a monogamist who cannot be happy in a poly relationship. In the second scenario, when you pick partners who want a different model of poly than you do, there's also going to be a lot of jealousy because people who want a different model of polyamory are unhappy. They're not getting what they think they need, want, and deserve, and so that creates jealousy. And in the third scenario, when you have terrible time and energy management skills, or you're just not able to handle the number of partners that you have taken on, yes, you're going to have intense jealousy because your partners are experiencing scarcity. Scarcity is the key cause of jealousy in poly relationships, that people are experiencing a scarcity of some valuable resource that they need and want: time, attention, sex, romance, affection, priority, all of those things. They're not getting enough of one or more of those things, and that triggers their jealousy. In the fourth scenario, jealousy is the primary cause of the poly breakup. And when that is true, the reasons for it are that there are usually three reasons why jealousy will cause a breakup. And the first two are general, and the third is more specific. The first one is that Homo sapiens as a species tend to be extremely territorial and possessive of all resources, including relationships. We totally suck at sharing resources, and we have a very poor track record of sharing, whether that's food, water, fuel, land, property, housing, or our sexual and romantic partners. We are particularly bad at that, and it tends to trigger that severe consequence of intense jealousy. The second reason is that we have been indoctrinated practically from birth to believe that we're entitled to our partner's sexual and romantic fidelity. We've been encouraged to feel jealous and to act out our jealousy, even to act out violently when our partner has any other interest or involvement with another person. And so it's natural that we are indoctrinated in that belief, and we are told that if we're not jealous, there's something wrong with us, that we don't really love our partner. So it's natural that we would have that culturally induced jealousy coming up. Third, last but not least, a very sizable percentage of people have pre-existing anxiety, insecurities, and low self-esteem. And these three qualities create intense jealousy that can become completely unmanageable. I don't mean to in any way pick on or disrespect people that are experiencing anxieties, insecurities, and low self-esteem. I'm only mentioning this because it means that they have to work a lot harder in order to overcome jealousy. They have to work a lot harder than anyone else to be able to learn to manage their jealousy, to improve their self-esteem enough to feel that, to be able to have the security internally to know that even if their partner is involved with someone else, it does not mean that they are unloved or undesirable. And so learning jealousy management techniques is useful for them, but it's even more useful for them to get therapy and use other self-help tools to enhance their self-esteem and overcome their own anxieties. People who have intense, untreated anxiety are very poor candidates for being happy in a polyamorous relationship, and really probably need to take a strong effort at that before even considering being polyamorous. And I know I'm out of time.